We would like to welcome you to this evening's webinar focusing on childhood cancer resources. This webinar is part of a series being run by the Cancer Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and is being sponsored by the Arms Wide Open Childhood Cancer Foundation. My name is Dana Dombrowski and I'm a social worker here at CHOP. I've been here for 8 years.
And I'm Susan Pultman. I am a neuro-oncology social worker. I've been at CHOP for about 2 years. In the past, I was the patient resource navigator. So before we get started with the webinar content itself, we just want to take care of a few housekeeping items. First of all, this is a moderated chat. So right below the video feed, there's a window, and you can use that window to connect with each other. But we'll review each post before it goes live, so you may experience a slight delay. And if you have questions for us, we'll take little question breaks in between our slides. So if you have questions, you can submit them, and we will do our best to answer them in the midst of the presentation. And you may want to have a pen and paper handy to write down some of the resources that we give you, because they may not appear on the slides. Alternatively, this webinar will be available online in about a week, and you'll receive a link in your inbox to know where to access that. And also in your inbox, shortly after the webinar, you will be receiving a survey, and we're always trying to improve the content of these webinars, so we would really appreciate any feedback you can give us.
So Susan and I introduced ourselves, and what we hope to do during this webinar is give you some concrete resources, but also give you an idea of who you can go to at your local hospital or medical center to get the resources and support that you need. So what are resources? It's such a general term, so we've sort of broke it down into 4 general areas: financial, emotional support, practical, and other. There are going to be several topics which we touch a little bit lightly on that would probably be worthy of a whole presentation themselves. So we'll leave time in between the slides and at the end for questions that you can ask about specific resources, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. We also recognize that we have participants from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and maybe other medical centers. So we're also going to give some guidance if you're not at CHOP about who you can go to, and if you're at CHOP, who you can go to get more support when you feel like you need it. So we often think about resources as this complex world because there are so many of them. People are often asking you, when your child is diagnosed with cancer, what can I do to help you? And many families don't know how to answer that. How can I help? How can somebody help me? So we like to think about a roadmap to this. So when you get a cancer diagnosis, doctors will often sit down with you and go over the roadmap to treatment. And we like to think about resources in that same way. What's available? How do I qualify? Who do I go to ask for help? So availability and qualifying, many resources have applications, they have guidelines, many are financial guidelines, some are diagnosis specific, and social workers can really help figure out what resources might be available to your family, what makes sense for you to apply to. So a lot of this is how do I ask for help and who do I go to, which can be a really hard task. Social workers are at the hospital to do this exact thing. So we recommend that if you haven't met a social worker or you haven't had a lot of contact with your social worker, that this is a really good place to start, to sit down and figure out what do I need help with, and then we can help you go from there. Many of the foundations that we work with are families that have been in the same exact shoes as you years ago, who have created foundations, many for financial support, some for emotional support. So it may be helpful to know that they know your needs better than a lot of other people. So it may bring you some comfort to go to these resources knowing that they've been in your shoes or at least similar shoes prior to this. You don't necessarily have to tell your story over and over again, which can also be a really hard thing to do. Social workers can help you fill out the application and determine what bits of your story or of your current life that you need to kind of reveal to get the assistance that you need. Most resources do have financial income guidelines, so again, we can sort of help you sift through those things to determine what you might be eligible for. There's also the national versus local. So national resources are available to anybody across the country. Your hospital might have access to local resources that are specific to your hospital, your child's diagnosis. So we recommend that if you haven't spoken with your team about those things, that they likely have access to those. So we recommend you talk to your team about that. And maybe most importantly, people as resources. So Susan and I can talk about what we do as social workers. At CHOP, we meet a family right at diagnosis. So we'll sit with a new family. We might sit in their family meeting and take notes. And we'll work with them at each step of the treatment phase to figure out and to assess what you might be needing. And we'll work with a family from that day one through the end of treatment. And we think this is really important because as we get to know a family, we can sort of see where things are at and almost predict what you might need. So it's really helpful to find a contact at your hospital that you feel comfortable with, that you feel comfortable telling your story, where your family was at before diagnosis and how the diagnosis has changed your family situation in order for us to best understand how we can help you. We can also be a great link to other members of the team. So if we can't answer your question might in the moment be a medical question, but you might know our face. So we can help link you to the medical team and the other team members listed here on this slide. Child Life can help prepare your child, the patient, and also the sibling for medical procedures, the hospital setting in general that can be very overwhelming to young children, and also provide distraction during procedures. So they are a great resource. At CHOP, we have them on both the inpatient unit as well as our outpatient clinic. So if you are at CHOP and you haven't gotten to know the Child Life specialist, we definitely recommend them as a resource for your children. Also part of the Child Life team are art therapists and music therapists and teachers. And again, those are all people that are here to support your child and family throughout this diagnosis and the treatment plan. And they're there for you to access. So sometimes all you need to do is ask, but again, we can help you do that. The medical team is certainly a resource in terms of the diagnosis and treatment plan. We often sit down and go over the diagnosis, and it's a big, overwhelming family meeting. And what we always encourage family members to remember is that we can sit down as much as you need. We can go over individual parts of the therapy and the treatment plan, so it might seem overwhelming at the beginning. So we often remind families that the medical team is always available. So we can help arrange additional meetings if you feel like you're not understanding what's up ahead or what's going on currently with your child in terms of the treatment. And we also have chaplains and a spiritual team here at CHOP, which can be a great resource. Many families start to rely on their faith, but also question their faith, and our spiritual team is available for families to utilize on a regular basis. And also specifically at CHOP, we're a teaching hospital. So your child and your family may see, hundreds of faces across the treatment period. Residents come in, fellows come in, they change over every 2 to 3 weeks. There's a different attending on service every week, and social workers can be a familiar face. So it's often nice to, again, find that person that you're going to connect to, that you're going to feel comfortable with, and you're going to recognize, and your child will recognize when they come in the room, to help you move forward through some of these really difficult times for your family.
So we felt like one of the best ways to describe all of the resources that may be available to you and your family is to use a fictional family. It's not, this family that we're going to describe is not based on any one specific family that we know at CHOP, but it's rather a composite of lots of our families that end up making a pretty realistic example. So our patient tonight is Lily. Lily is 8 years old, and she was just diagnosed with ALL, which stands for acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's a blood cancer. Lily lives with her mom, her dad, and her 4-year-old brother, Caleb. Mom is a registered nurse, and dad is a cable technician, and the family does have insurance. So the rest of the slides we're going to talk about kind of as relates to Lily's family and Lily's family's concerns that hopefully will relate to some of your concerns as well. So when a child's diagnosed with cancer, of course, the parents and the family's first struggle is dealing with the diagnosis and making sure that their child is getting the best care as possible. That's everybody's first concern. And then second concern, or one that comes up later, is financial issues, because that's just the reality of our healthcare system. So in Lily's case, her family's main concerns are the meals in the hospital. They've been inpatient for months, and the hospital cafeteria gets expensive if you're eating there every meal. Keeping up with the household bills, even if they're not at the hospital, even if they're not at home, the electricity still stays on, the gas still stays on, those bills still pile up. Medical bills, of course, even though this family has insurance, there's still co-pays to deal with and other out-of-pocket costs, like over-the-counter drugs at the pharmacy and things like that. Lodging costs. Lily's family happens to live about an hour and a half away from CHOP, so it's not always convenient for them to go back and forth, so sometimes they may want to stay at hotels, so that's a cost that's on their mind as well. And then, of course, unpaid time off of work. The family has to take off work to care for Caleb and for Lily, so there's the concern of paychecks not being what they used to be. So the good news is that there's a lot of financial resources out there. One such resource is FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act. That's a federal mandate that has different eligibility per state, so you'll want to talk to your social worker and your HR department to see if you qualify for that and what needs to be done in your state. And then also governmental resources like SSI and Medicaid, or medical assistance. In some states, Pennsylvania being one of them, we're really lucky to have a diagnosis-based secondary Medicaid system. So even if your family does not qualify financially for Medicaid, you may qualify for secondary Medicaid based on your child's diagnosis, and your social worker and or case manager can help you figure that out as well. There are financial resources that are national, and then there are financial resources that are local or regional. So some national ones are the National Children's Cancer Society, or NCCS. One of the main things that they do is really provide transportation reimbursement. So based on mileage, how often you're coming back and forth to the hospital, that one has a financial guideline that your social worker can tell you more about. Other diagnosis-specific organizations like the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and certain brain tumor foundations will also provide assistance on a national level. And then there's Alex's Lemonade Stand, which also provides a lot of financial assistance in the form of gas cards and transportation assistance and housing assistance for our families. There's also a lot of local and regional assistance that your social worker will be the best person to help guide you to these. Like Dana said, a lot of families who have gone through this really understand the need for those bills. So sometimes if your electric bill feels like a big stressor, your social worker can help you find resources to take that burden off of you, so you can really focus on keeping your child as happy and healthy as possible. And then finally, there are also housing programs, so that if you are relocated from your house, you can stay at the Ronald McDonald House or Hope Lodge, or a program that we have here in Philadelphia called Host for Hospitals, where people actually open up their homes if they have a spare room or a guest house, or they're out of town for a few months, that they may allow you to stay there as well. And again, your social worker can help direct you to these resources.
And I think, as we go into the winter months and, we're all turning our heat systems on and the bills are getting more expensive, many families get into a spot where they can't pay their bills, and then they're in jeopardy of having their electric or their heat turned off. And those are really critical time periods to let your social worker or case manager know, because there actually are things that we can do to help you, whether it be to actually help you with assistance with a bill to get it turned back on, or to talk to the utility company and say there's a medical situation in this family, they need to have their utility on. And even if your child's at the hospital, this is important because your child's going to be discharged at some point, and what we don't want is you to get into a situation where your child is then being discharged to what could be an unsafe home situation if you don't have heat when it's very cold out. So those are all things that can be really hard to talk about, but there are ways that we can help you. So it's really important for us to know what's currently going on at home. Just a reminder, if you have questions, feel free to type them in. We can kind of continue to take little breaks and try to answer your questions as best as possible. But for now, we'll keep going to the next resource group of transportation. Lily and her family live 1.5 hours away, so they specifically had concerns regarding gas, which we all know is very expensive, and parking in the city. Specific to CHOP, we are a hospital right in the center of the city. Parking is expensive, lodging is expensive, and those are all real concerns. They also had to think about the coordination of the care for the brother Caleb, and how are they going to get him back and forth to the hospital, and how are the parents going to go back and forth to make sure their son is cared for. So all of those things add up in terms of cost. So specifically for transportation, there are, again, a lot of things that can be used. So there's a category of emergency resources that our social work department and many other social work departments have access to. So, for families that are in crisis or in an emergency, we often have tokens for families to use, or a parking pass to get out of the garage if they've been here a couple of days. Sometimes foundations will donate gas cards, which can be extremely helpful in terms of getting back and forth. Some foundations provide reimbursement for those things. So again, it's just another thing to acknowledge. These little things, a $2 token or a $30 fill up of the gas tank, when you're paying for those expenses every single week, they add up to hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over the course of treatment. So while asking for a $2 token may seem a little bit silly, it can really help in the overall scheme of the treatment plan and how long you might be inpatient or needing to travel back and forth to the outpatient clinic. Some families need flight assistance. So here at CHOP, we have families coming here for therapies that might not be available at your local hospital. And they may need to fly here. So that can look different for different families. Some families take advantage of flight resources that don't charge, like Corporate Angels, Angel Flight, but those are not always available, and sometimes they're weather dependent, which might seem silly, but if you need to get to a hospital and it's a time-sensitive issue, like a treatment needs to start on a specific date, you might need to fly on a corporate airline, which we all know can be quite expensive. So there are some foundations that can help with this. Alex's Lemonade Stand is one of them if you're going to certain hospitals. We have a hospital here, a travel fund for hospitals specifically for families that have children on phase 1 or phase 2 therapies that can help with reimbursement for travel expenses. That's, again, a very specific resource and a unique resource, but you want to start thinking about what might my child be eligible for. And then there are programs like Southwest Airlines that sometimes donates flight tickets to hospitals for social workers to give to families to use to fly back and forth that are completely free of charge. So again, it's good to start a dialogue with the people at the hospital that you're traveling to see what might be available, whether it's an upfront assistance or it might be a reimbursement assistance. Parking can be quite expensive. So For example, here at CHOP, they might be paying $3 a day, but if your child is inpatient for a month or 2 months or 3 months, those costs add up again quite quickly. So again, it's something that you really want to think of in terms of what resources can I apply to, and who might be able to help me, whether it be getting a parking pass or applying to a foundation for assistance that might last over the course of your entire treatment. There are sometimes programs that offer volunteer drivers. That might be through your local church community. It might be through a Road to Recovery program, through the American Cancer Society. There are programs that offer mileage reimbursement that Susan mentioned before, so National Children's Cancer Society, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And then there's Medicaid transport, which is really important. Some families don't even think to look to their insurance company, whether it be Medicaid or a regular HMO, to see is there an option for travel assistance. So here in Pennsylvania and specifically Philadelphia, we use Logisticare, and that's completely covered by insurance. So depending on what your child's level of need is, they might send a van or ambulance transport might be arranged, but they can bring you to your outpatient clinic appointments and then take you back home. Or they can drop you off if your child is scheduled to be admitted for chemotherapy or a surgery, and then we can arrange for the transportation back home upon discharge. So it's really important to think of, are there resources that are not going to cost me any money, and how can we best use those? Sometimes getting into those systems is very complex. Sometimes it requires a long phone conversation or being on hold or trying to go through the phone tree menu, and that can be really frustrating. So part of our recommendations are always to do this at a time where you're never going to be not stressed, but maybe your child doesn't have procedures during one day, and you might be able to sort of sneak away for an hour to make all of these phone calls. Or we can sit with you and sort of walk you through what are the expectations, who am I going to talk to, what information are they going to need. And we do this with the insurance process also. You know, we have a list of what are we going to need to apply for Medicaid. We can help you get a letter of medical necessity from the doctor. And sometimes it helps to just have a person there to, if you don't know the answer to a question, to relay the question to, or for some guidance. So think about either having somebody at the hospital or maybe a family member or a friend that can sit with you, so that when it's really stressful, when you've been on hold for 30 minutes, you have somebody that you can look to for a little extra support. Again, it's hard to ask for support, but when you need it, most people are wanting to help you, so there are some concrete ideas that you can give them when you're in crisis.
And that can also go for rides to the hospital. We hear from a lot of families that they have a lot of people reaching out saying, what can we do, what can we do, what can we do? And like Dana said, sometimes concrete things like, you could accompany me to my daughter's clinic appointment. You could sit with me while I make this phone call. Will make you feel like you're well supported, and also help your friends and family members to feel like they can do something to really help.
And now we're going to move on to emotional support and resources, which can really be the most complex of all, and some of the most difficult to ask for and to feel like you're getting the best support possible. So for Lily, we think about how overwhelmed her parents are with the news that their daughter has cancer. Some of the first questions that parents often ask are, well, how am I ever going to tell my child that he or she has cancer? Or how am I going to tell his or her brother or sister? And those are really important things. We like to remind parents that children are very wise and they're often paying attention. So we might think that they don't know that they're sick, or we might think that they don't know they have cancer, and kids often figure it out pretty easily. And sometimes they don't tell us because they're trying to protect their parents or other family members. But part of our job as social workers and also with child life specialists is to sit down with parents and caregivers and talk about how do we talk to children about having cancer. It's going to look a little bit differently depending on your child's age, but there are tools and tips that we can give you. Child Life is awesome at sitting with patients and getting a grasp on where they're at and what they know, and teaching them what they need to know so that they're not more scared than they already are, or that they're not more stressed or anxious than they already are. And we can do this with both patients and siblings. What we find often happens, especially at the beginning, when the patients are so sick, the siblings often stay at home with other caregivers, which we certainly understand, but we often recommend that at some point when things have settled down a little bit is for the siblings to come in and to see the hospital setting and to see their brother or sister, because what we've quickly learned is that imaginations can be way worse than the reality of what is actually going on. So we want to do it in an educated and well-supported way so that both the parents and staff are available to the patient and siblings, and that we can provide the support and the education that's necessary for them to get the information that they need, which is often very brief, concrete bits of information, but that they can get it in a way that they're going to be supported and might even feel open enough to ask some questions or say what they've been afraid of. So there are ways that we can incorporate information giving to both patients and siblings that we think is really important. And again, you can use your resources, which are often staff members, to help do this, or to help give you the tools and information so that you can do this on your own with your children. And families feel differently about this. Some want to do it on their own as a core family unit, and some like it to be more of a team work effort where we might actually sit in with a patient and or sibling to give them this information all together. We often can be a liaison to the school if a patient is in school. This can be really important because school is one of the most normal childhood tasks, and to have to leave that can be really difficult for both the patient as well as the caregivers. And also thinking about the school staff who may not have all of the education and information on what is the diagnosis, what can we expect when the child goes back to school. And this is really important because children do go back to school. They go back to school while they're on treatment, depending on their specific situation. So we want to make sure that the teachers and the guidance counselors and all of the classmates have the information that they need. And sometimes that's just giving the information and the support to the teachers who can then provide it to the classmate. Sometimes it's actually doing a presentation to the classmates to help them understand why Lily, their classmate, isn't in school and might not be in school for weeks. And when she comes back, she might have no hair and she might have an NG tube. And how can we help kids prepare for that so that Lily can go back into a really supportive setting and focus on being a kid and getting her education, which are so important. There's also websites, we're in the age of technology. We're doing a webinar now, which is an example of an emotional support resource. But there are websites like Caring Bridge and Care Pages that you can sort of use as an online blog or journal to help other family members or friends or people in your community know what you're dealing with. This is sometimes a great way of getting the information out, but not having to make 100 phone calls. You can be very specific about what details you give out and what details you don't give out, but it's a great communication tool for some families in a way that other family members and friends can check in with you without bothering you during the day, if that's helpful to you. At CHOP, we give out new patient diagnosis bags, and in those bags are some fun things, but there's also some really valuable tools. Sometimes there's a journal in there to help you either keep track of your questions or your thoughts during each day. There's also educational books. We give out a book by Nancy Keene. The last name of the author is Keene, and she has done a series of books that are sort of broken down based on diagnosis. So there's a book for solid tumors. There's a book for liquid cancers like leukemia. There's a book for brain tumors, and there's a book for survivors. And it's sort of in a story format in an educational way. And there's also a glossary of terms in the back, which is one of my most favorite reasons for giving out this book, because when you're your child is diagnosed, you often haven't heard any of these medical terms ever before. And when you're sitting in a family meeting, it's hard to ask about every single term that you haven't asked. And the glossary is a great way to look up, you can jot down words that you might have never heard. You can look up the words and go specifically to the place in the book that it's fully described, whether it's the diagnosis or it's about a specific transfusion. And that's a great starting place. But we also would recommend that you use the book as a tool, but then to sort of loop back around with your medical team and or social worker to say, these are the points where I'm still not really understanding. I think our biggest fear as medical teams is that we're giving you all of this information, and we want to make sure that you're actually understanding it, because it's really easy to get overwhelmed when things feel in crisis. So we definitely recommend you use those books as a tool. So other examples of emotional support are, again, online forums, support groups. We do support groups on the inpatient unit here at CHOP. We've just started a spiritual support group on the inpatient unit. So it's important for you to ask your local hospitals what they might offer either in the inpatient or outpatient setting. Sometimes groups aren't always available, depending on availability, but it's always important to ask. The other important tool is counseling and psychotherapy, either in the hospital and or in the community. So if your child is in crisis, and we certainly expect you as a family to be sad and overwhelmed at the beginning of a diagnosis, but if you feel like you're sort of spiraling downhill and you're not getting used to the diagnosis and feeling like you're a bit better able to cope, we often suggest that you first go to your social worker, who hopefully already knows you, to talk about where things are at. And sometimes families need a little bit more intense support and counseling. We have psychology services here at CHOP, but sometimes it makes sense to go to your community, and we can again help you find the resources in your local community, whether it be a psychologist or a social worker out in the community, to get regular support, because we all understand that this is hard, this is difficult, and you might need more support than you're getting while you're at the hospital. So it's important to, again, talk to the people that you know at the hospital and let them know if you feel like you're struggling and it's not getting better, or especially if it's getting worse. Sibling support, we talked a little bit about using child life services in the hospital. We have SIB shops here at CHOP, which is a group specifically for siblings of children with chronic illness. We do one specifically for oncology patient siblings. So it's a way that they can sort of feel like they're getting their time to talk about their needs and what's been difficult for them, and hopefully feel supported in the end. This whole psychosocial team is a resource. So social workers, child life, psychology, teachers, art therapists, music therapy, we're all part of that greater psychosocial team. So you can use any and all of those supports as needed. And then again, chaplaincy and the religious support. So we have the Schlim Center for Prayer and Reflection here at CHOP. So that's actually a physical, quiet space that you can go to pray, to sort of clear your mind. Our chaplains are often down there, so they can be a support to you in the moment, but it's a way for you to get out of the room and focus on what you feel you need in terms of support.
And just a couple other things to point out. When we talk about one-on-one connections and support, one of the organizations that I want to highlight is Immerman Angels. You can go to their website. It's immermanangels.org with one M. And I kind of consider them like a matchmaking organization, but not in a romantic sense. They match people who have already gone through the cancer experience. They match them with people who are just starting. So they'll match parents, they'll match patients, they'll match siblings, they'll match grandparents, kind of whoever needs support, they'll match you with somebody who's a veteran of all of it. I've only heard really good things about the organization. They really provide a lot of really wonderful support, because as much as your social worker, your child life specialist, your doctor, your chaplain can help you with all of this, Most of us haven't actually been through the experience in a parent or a patient's shoes, and the mentors from Immerman Angels have, and so they can really provide you with support in a different way than a lot of other people can. So I can't say enough about that organization. And then also we're talking a lot about sibling support. There was a webinar, 2 webinars I believe ago in this same series that was about siblings specifically. So you can access that archived webinar on the website as well. We have some questions.
So the first question is, are there resources available that will help me manage stress as a caregiver? So I think, we've talked about several ways that you can do this in the hospital and or community setting, in terms of either finding another family in the same or similar situation that you can go to as a resource, using social work and or psychology support. And sometimes it's just making sure that you have regular access to some sort of supportive setting, whether it be a caregiver group or a support group that meets once a month, or to seeing a psychologist or a social worker in your community once every week. I think the key to it is finding regular support so that you're not only accessing these resources in the time of crisis. You want to have all of these supports in place the duration of your child's treatment, because you don't know what those highs and lows are going to be. And if you have a consistent level of support, or you at least know who you can go to in those moments, it's going to be a lot easier than sort of in those moments of crisis trying to figure out where can I go and who can I trust to help me. And I think, we just like to recognize that November is National Caregiver Month. So, certainly this is a hot topic of, we need to recognize that there is such a thing as caregiver stress, and taking care of your child day in and day out. You wouldn't do anything else but that, but it's really hard work. And parents often feel a lot of guilt and a lot of ownership of their child being sick. You want, as a parent, to always protect your child, and you never want them to be sick. And it's a really hard thing when you have no control over this diagnosis. So making sure that you're supported so that you can continue to support your child or your grandchild is extremely important.
And there are a few web resources for caregivers as well. I'll give you a few. One is caregiveraction.org. That's the Caregiver Action Network, and they have a plethora of resources. They have a caregiver toolbox. They have tips on how to most effectively communicate with your healthcare providers. They have checklists that are helpful to bring to appointments to make sure that you're getting the questions answered that you want to, that you may forget in that moment. There's also caregiver.org. They do a lot of webinars similar to this that are based on caregiver concerns, caregiver stress management. And then there's actually a website called caregiverstress.com that's all about how to manage stress, mindfulness, meditation, ways to find peace in sort of this really chaotic environment and time in your life. And then finally, cancer, those are all general caregiver resources that may have resources for caregivers of children and of partners and of parents. There's a specific resource called Cancer Care, and they do, among other things, support groups for caregivers of cancer patients. So they have, if you're in New York and New Jersey, they have in-person support groups. If you are not, they have online support groups, they have telephone support groups, and they have a lot of really helpful podcasts and pamphlets that you can print out to help you through this process.
And the second question we just talked about, but how can I find other families who are also coping with a child's cancer that I could possibly meet up with in person? So Susan mentioned Immerman Angels, but the other way to do it is to, if you see a support group either in your hospital or your community, to attend that and see if there might be a connection made. I think we all certainly value that nobody knows what you're going through, but to find another parent or another patient that might have had a similar experience can be really helpful. The other thing that I didn't mention, but I was thinking of, is different organizations offer sort of like binders or journals So curesearch.org has a journal set up where you can keep log of your questions and your team members that are going to be important in the overall medical team of your child. CHOP, we have patient binders that can help you keep track of team members, of lab results, of scan results, because there is a lot of information, and each test that your child has is you're going to have a hard time remembering all of those details. So there are ways that you can help keep all of that organized. I believe Alex's Lemonade Stand also has sort of a way to help keep information organized, and that's part of the challenge. So if you have a go-to spot where you can keep all of your information, you're going to at least know where to start if somebody asks you a question in terms of your child's medical history, which can be stressful to try to remember everything that your child has been through, especially after you've started the course of treatment. So that's just also something to keep in mind going forward.
So some of the resources that we're going to talk about don't really fit in the financial or the practical category. It's really because kids who have been diagnosed with cancer or any other serious illness still want to be kids, and they still want to be normal, and they sometimes need some special pick-me-ups to get them through some of the really tougher times. For kids to meet other kids, to feel like they're not the only one in their situation. And sometimes this can be just as important as the financial piece or the medical piece, that a child feels well supported and loved and like there's fun things to look forward to. There are actually a lot of organizations that provide these kinds of things, and your social worker and child life specialist can direct you to some of them. Broadly, there are wigs and head covering resources that if your child loses his or her hair due to chemotherapy or radiation or other parts of treatment, there are organizations that will help you pay for a wig for your child if he or she wants one. They can be really expensive, especially if they're human hair. So some organizations will help provide them. And then in different regional areas, there are different services. So here in Philadelphia area, we have an organization, or a business actually, called Girl on the Go, and she'll go do wig consultations in your home. So in case your child doesn't want to be in a salon with other people or have to take his or her hat off and show their bald head, which a lot of kids actually are fine with, but she'll do that in the privacy of your home. And there are other organizations around the country that do that. There are also websites that have tutorials on how to tie scarves in creative ways and how to style wigs. And a lot of times patients have a lot of fun looking at those and learning new things. One of the other really fun organizations and types of resources, wish granting. So Make-A-Wish is the largest organization of this type. They grant wishes to children with life-threatening illnesses. There's sort of a myth out there that Make-A-Wish grants wish to children who are terminal or who are actively dying, and that's actually not the case. Any child with a cancer diagnosis can get a wish granted from Make-A-Wish. And then there are also a lot of other smaller wish foundations locally that do similar things, and your social worker can help you get referred to those. And they do really, really wonderful things that can give kids really an exciting thing to look forward to after treatment is finished, or as a pick-me-up in the middle of treatment, depending on his or her situation. Oncology camps, I can't say enough about camp for kids with cancer or any really serious illness. Dana and I actually both worked this summer at Ronald McDonald Camp, which is one of the big camps in our area that serves kids with cancer. There are over 100 camps all over the country. I think they're the happiest places on earth. I really do. It's where kids who have cancer or have survived cancer can just be normal kids, because nobody's staring at their bald heads, nobody's wondering why they're walking a different way. It's really just a normal, fun environment that's tailored towards our kids. So things are modified. If they have trouble with heights, things will be modified for that. If they have trouble swimming, things will be modified for that. And if they don't have trouble with anything, great. They just get to go to camp and have a good time. Some of the camps also serve siblings, some don't. And it's a wonderful opportunity for siblings to be with people who really get what they're going through. And then there's other organizations that just do fun social things. So some organizations like Team Impact and Friends of Jacqueline match kids up with sports teams so that they can get some mentorship and some support and some socialization with college sports teams. There's an organization in our region called Casey Cares that really just focuses on sending the kids fun things like tickets to events or movie and pizza nights at home, fun pajamas for when they're in the hospital, things like that, that really just kind of give kids pick-me-ups that they need. And then another resource that I wanted to highlight is called Lucy's Love Bus. It's a fairly new foundation out of Boston that recognizes the benefits of therapies like art therapy, music therapy, play therapy. Sometimes, if it's doctor okayed, complementary medical treatments like acupuncture, massage, but again, only if it's okayed by the child's oncologist. And Lucy's Love Bus will actually help families pay for up to $1,000 worth of these therapies as long as they're not covered by insurance. So that's a really wonderful organization to talk to if your child needs some sort of different kinds of therapies.
And just some of the other big camps, in case people are wanting to Google them, there's Camp Sunshine in Maine, there's the Hole in the Wall Gang camps. There are so many camps out there, but those are two other of the main ones that many of our patients go to.
Camp Sunshine's neat because it's a family camp, so it's for the parents and the siblings and anybody who lives in the home, and it's a pretty rare opportunity where families get to go to camp together like that. And some of the programming is really support-based, and some of it's just fun. So that's a wonderful, wonderful program. And then one population that we wanted to highlight is adolescents and young adults. So that's, depending on the hospital and the organization, that usually ranges from around 15 years old to 40 years old. And some hospitals treat older than that or younger than that as AYA. AYA is the abbreviation for adolescents and young adults. Because this is a population that doesn't really fit in with the little kids, and they don't really fit in with the older adults that we typically think of as cancer patients. So sometimes they feel like they're a little bit stuck in the middle and they have kind of special needs of their own. And it's really a national movement right now to pay attention to this specific group. So it's a group to keep an eye out for resources that are being developed every month. There's new things that come out for this specific age group. So just a couple we wanted to highlight. Stupid Cancer is an organization that I really like. They don't take themselves too seriously, but they deal with really serious topics. Their website is stupidcancer.org. Again, it's stupidcancer.org. And they serve as really a resource bank for all kinds of needs that adolescents and young adults might have. When you go to their website, there are different buttons that you can click on that say, I need a job, I need money, I need a break, I need a friend, all kinds of different needs that people have. And if you click on that, up will pop a lot of resources and different websites and organizations that you can contact for those needs. They also have conferences once a year. Their big one is in Las Vegas, but then they have some other ones scattered around the country. And in some cities, they have meetup groups where people can just get together and hang out and get to know each other with that sort of shared reality of being a cancer patient or survivor. Of course, technology, there's Facebook groups. CHOP Cancer Center has our own Facebook page. We also have an AYA-specific Facebook group that's private. A lot of hospitals do the same thing, and a lot of organizations have their own Facebook page where people will post on, share their stories, get support, cheer each other on. And that goes for the adolescents and young adults and also for parents. There's different Facebook pages for different age groups. Another organization that I love to refer people to is First Ascents. It's an adventure program for adolescents and young adults 18 to 40 who either have cancer or have had cancer. And on this program, survivors go in small groups. I think it's about 10 to 15 participants per group. And they can either go kayaking, rock climbing, or surfing. And it's a fully funded trip. The participant usually has to pay to get to the location, although there's also financial assistance if you need it. And it's just a way for patients and survivors to get away, to do something fun, to re-empower themselves after treatment or during treatment to do things that they never expected they could do. I've had a few friends go through this program, and it's been life-changing for all of them. I think it's a really wonderful program. My advice with the program is, if it sounds at all interesting to you or someone you know, go to the website and apply now, because they usually have about a year-long waiting list. So if you put your information in now, you'll get on that list, and then you can make your decision once there's room for you. And then there's also a lot of scholarships available for patients and survivors of cancer. And here at CHOP, we have a big list that's available on our website of scholarships throughout the country for patients and survivors, and also one for siblings. You can ask your social worker at your local hospital if they have a similar list for scholarships specifically in your region.
So we have a bunch of questions that we're going to try to get to. We're going to start with, what do you do if a family member needs help but they're too proud to ask for help? My sister and her family are struggling to pay the bills. I think this is something that happens all of the time and is pretty normal. And, you know, I think as social workers, we're trying to do assessments all of the time, and we're trying to sort of weed out what the needs might be. And sometimes it's asking flat out, you know, are you financially struggling? Because we know that many families do. But there are still many families that will never speak up and say that they need help. And I think that there's a couple things that you can do. I think you can support your family member. So in this case, your sister. I think you can support her and remind her that there are places, there are foundations that can help, and they're specifically for this situation. You know, I think so many of our families come in, you know, their child is just diagnosed with cancer. Before this, they were doing just fine. They were making ends meet, whether it was they were living paycheck to paycheck and just getting their bills paid, or that they were really doing fine and they didn't have financial worries. A cancer diagnosis changes everything, and it really turns your world upside down. In most cases, if you're coming from a two working parent household, one parent often has to stop working or is taking unpaid leave. And I think for most families going through that, that would be a significant family challenge. So I would encourage your sister to talk to his or her, the patient's social worker, because that's what we're here to help. You know, you certainly don't want your sister to feel like you're going behind her back to access the resources, but I think encouraging her, telling her why you're concerned, maybe even suggesting some of these specific resources would be a great place to start.
And the next question is, are all of these programs need-based? Even for families who are more well off, the out-of-pocket costs really add up. Absolutely, they do. And just like Dana said, a lot of these resources really are for families who were doing okay. And so some of the resources are needs-based. Some have an exact financial cutoff. If you make more than this amount of money, you don't qualify. And those resources are meant for people who were previously struggling or just of a lower income level. Some resources don't have those cutoffs. A lot of them ask the social workers to sort of assess financial need and recommend whether a family should be eligible or not, and don't even ask for financial information. And we're pretty good at knowing how financially families are affected by this, and we know how those out-of-pocket costs add up. Just like Dana said, we know that $2 bus tokens add up very quickly and get very stressful. So if you have even any kind of financial concerns, please don't hesitate to contact your social worker, because we're not judgmental. We just really want to help.
And I think a lot of families are often concerned about that number on the income line of the application, which many foundations require. But you can make however many thousands of dollars, but if you have medical debt, if you have medical copays, you're paying for sibling child care, mom's not working anymore, so you're down to one income. All of those things really affect that income number. So I guess what I would say is, don't be afraid to ask just because you think your income might be high, because what we're going to do is sit down and really look at your whole budget plan and say, well, you make this income, but what are all the other expenses that you have? Your daily living expenses, but also the expenses specifically incurred by this cancer diagnosis. So I would say don't let it stop you from asking for help. The next question is, do you ever find that patients become a resource to each other while they are going through the same treatment at the same hospital? Is this something you think is beneficial to patients? Yes and yes. I think that it naturally happens. So for patients that are on precautions, they might meet in the playroom, especially for our teen and young adult patients, they might meet in the teen room. Patients meet at camp and have developed some of these really awesome friendships. But I think it's important to recognize while this may be extremely beneficial, it also may be extremely hard. So, for example, if one patient isn't doing so great one week, that can be really hard for the other patient to know and have to deal with while still coping with their own cancer diagnosis. And this can be the same with parent-to-parent connections. We have a lot of parents saying, well, I met so-and-so, I met this parent, and gosh, they're having a hard week, and I feel awful that they're having a hard week. So it can actually increase stress at sometimes. I don't think it's a reason to not have the connections, but I think it's good to be aware of, where are you currently at? How are you coping? And if you're having a rough week, if your child's having a rough week, it's okay to focus on your child and not necessarily sort of be that community support to others. I think there's a balance to being involved with other families and to taking a step back and focusing on your own child.
Next question is, I'm having trouble managing all the medical bills coming in. Do you have any tips for helping me stay on top of how much I owe and when my bills are due? It's a really good question. I guess one of my tips would be not to throw the bills in the corner and throw a sheet over them and pretend that they don't exist. Because while that'll definitely help in the short term, they'll always come back. And so I just hate to see families sort of throw everything in a corner and hope that they won't come back, because they will. I think one way to keep track of them is, even if you want to throw them in the corner, write something down first, especially with that due date on it, and then throw it in the corner if you need to, and do what you need. But at least have a list that you can look through and have an idea, even if you can't pay everyone on time, to at least know sort of how you're doing and what to expect next.
And I think the other things are important. If you're having trouble paying a medical bill, to call our billing specialist. They can set up payment plans. It's much better to make a small payment versus to make no payment at all. And those are things that can be done, so definitely call and ask if you're having trouble. If you feel like something isn't right on the bill, it can be really hard to know what all of the coding means. So if you feel like something just doesn't seem right, call billing and ask. We also have a financial counselor specifically in oncology that can sort of help navigate insurance issues. So if you feel like something really isn't wrong, if it's a billing specific question, you'll still get directed back towards billing. But if it's more of an insurance question, what should I do? I'm changing over insurances. Is this still going to be covered? Then you'll want to talk to our financial counselor. But trying to stay on top of things and keeping things organized is really important, whether you have a folder for all of your bills or you just keep track, like Susan said, on a piece of paper.
And then some of the resources that we've been talking about, the financial resources that we've mentioned, sometimes an electric bill can become stressful. We can also kind of deflect some of that money that even if your electric bill seems doable, but your medical bill is too hard, we can help you take care of the electric bills so that you can then use that money to pay for medical bills.
Are there resources for teachers of students coming back to school after a cancer diagnosis or during treatment? If so, what would these be? Yes. First of all, social workers can be a resource in terms of giving information, helping to anticipate what questions classmates might ask and how we can answer those in an age-appropriate way. We actually have a back-to-school handbook that we give out to families and or teachers. So if you're at CHOP, you can certainly ask about that. We can get you a copy, and I think it's online now. So that's certainly a web-based resource that you can access. I believe American Cancer Society has a back-to-school resource. So there are definitely actual printed materials, but I think it often helps for teachers to be able to ask their own questions. They may not know about childhood cancer or what to expect or what the patient's going to expect. So I think, again, they can also use the hospital resources. We often have nurses calling in to our nurse practitioners or to our clinic to say, you know, what might we expect when the student is in school? What are they going to need to come to my office for? The last thing we would want is for the child to just show up and everybody be caught off guard. So the more prep work and education that we can provide in advance of the child going back to school, the better. Any other questions? So I think that concludes our webinar for tonight. Thank you for all of the great questions. We hope we answered them in a way that was helpful to you. And like we said, the webinar will be available online about a week from now. So if you want to go back, if you missed any of the resources that we specifically mentioned. So thank you.